Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our latest instalment of Remote Product London. As always, great to see many of you returning, and there's a few new names and faces this week. So hopefully you all enjoy this week's session. Just a couple of house rules. Can I please request that everyone stays on mute? I like to sort of really keep the fluidity of the event. And it allows our speakers to be able to deliver their talks, which we're all here to listen to smoothly. And then when we do Q&A at the end, it will allow everyone to listen answers. So if I could just kindly ask that you do put your questions into the chat privately to me.
Sorry, looks like we may have lost Alex, by the way, but I'll kick things off. I think all he wanted to mention was when it comes to questions, just please message them privately to Alex. It's under Oliver Bernard's. So if you want to send them through privately, that's great. John, I think you're up first, or Becky actually, sorry. Becky, you're up first, so I'll hand over to you. Feel free to share your screen and hope everyone enjoys.
Thanks. Okay.
I think I'm back now. Becky, are you up and okay, ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Shall I kick off?
Thanks for stepping in, Sina. Becky, over to you. Let me just do my part of Becky Yelland, Director and Head of Product, and her talk is being an industry agnostic product manager. Becky, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here this evening. So I'm going to kick straight off because I know that we're short on time. I didn't quite catch what you said around questions, but I'm assuming that they're going to be fielded through you, Sina and Alex. So I'll just carry on and assume that if there's any questions, you'll let me know.
That's correct. We'll do Q&A at the end. If everybody just message me privately their questions, I'll ask you at the end.
Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. So the first thing I think is probably worth going over is what exactly do I mean, or do we mean by the term being industry agnostic? So I think most of us probably are aware with the term, platform agnostic. So talking about the apps that we build or the software that we build being able to be used across many different software platforms. And to be honest with you, this is a phrase that I started using back in around 2016, realizing that actually I was doing a lot of industry hopping, and the role of being a product person in essence is also agnostic to the industry that we're working in. And I wrote an article about that, as I said, 2016. And actually, I think from the research that I've done leading up to today, I think a lot of people would agree with me. And there was a lot of discussion on LinkedIn. I did a poll on a couple of groups, sort of product discipline groups on LinkedIn, just to see, as well as obviously you guys all fed back through SurveyMonkey. And so I collated all of that, and I'll go through it in a minute. But I think one thing to sort of think about as well is that whilst we as product people might think and feel that we are able to move around from industry to industry, I think that there is definitely a need that's come out through the discussion, and certainly one that I've witnessed over the course of my career, that we do need hiring managers in organisations and organisations themselves, as well as recruiters, product-specific recruiters, to understand and recognise the value of attracting product specialists and not industry specialists for roles. So I also did a poll just asking product recruiters as well, how do you feel about this challenge, and do you agree that we are actually able to jump from industry to industry as much as our peers in maybe design or development? And I'll go through those results with you guys as well. So sorry for the busy slide, but there was quite a lot of information that I pulled in leading up to the talk today to give you a view of what other people feel and how other product people feel about this question or this topic. So I collated all the results from the SurveyMonkey, to thank you all of you who participated, and I pulled those together with the variety of polls that I put onto LinkedIn. So in total there was over 1,100 responses, which is great. And as you can see, there's a really broad mix, but I would say in the main that the majority of people have worked in, as you can see from the data, more than one industry. So you've got 24 people who said in total across that 1,100 plus responses that they worked in one industry. And then we've got 30% who said two, and then a whopping 49, so nearly half of the respondees saying that they've worked in 3 or 4 or more industries. And of course, there's several of us, myself included, and a lot of people who I believe are on the call today, who have worked in even more than that, so 5 or 6 or more. But you know, that's what comes of being somebody who's looking for new and exciting challenges and having done the role as we have for nearly 2 decades, which is quite shocking really when I think about it. So we also saw a good widespread of industry that people are working in. So this data here on the right of the slide is from you guys. So this is you telling me what industries you currently work in. So you've got a lot of finance, so finance services, corporate, that's the 9% one there. Got fintech, and we've got, we had quite a lot of other, and there's 12% of you in transportation, and there's a few 9% down here in education and IT. So there's a big broad spread of industries that we work in. And certainly that's the thing that I say to my colleagues and anyone who cares to listen, that the one thing I love about the product discipline and the choices that I've made in my career is that it opens doors up for me to be able to work in different organizations, delivering products to different types of customers, different types of users. I've done B2B, B2C, B2B2C, in lots of different technologies as well, and working with lots of different types of people. And that's the thing that I love about the opportunities that we have through working as product people. So I'll just move to the next slide. Then there was a little bit more anecdotal stuff that we had talking about if you feel that there is anything preventing you from moving into a different industry, what sort of things would those be? So it's interesting to see that domain or industry knowledge is definitely in there, whether that's because you feel you need to know it or because you're being fed that by the hiring managers, the job specs that you see, or the recruiters you're talking to. I don't know. I certainly don't let that stop me. If it says, even if it's an essential, I don't let that stop me from applying to a job. Certainly hasn't stopped me from actually getting jobs where people have asked for a domain or industry knowledge, because I think the product as a specialism is the thing that makes us valuable, and we can certainly learn domain or industry knowledge. And I've learned some really complex ones in terms of blockchain technology, trade finance for banks, you know, really complex industries that you have to grapple with. But the toolkit that we use and the job we do always remains the same, always, without fail, for me anyway. And I'm sure that many people agree with me on that. So we've got regulatory complexities, but again, as product specialists, are we being asked to be the regulator specialist or the compliance specialist? More often than not, I would say no, that you normally have SMEs in the organisation who are there understanding those, and you rely on those and you build relationships with those people. Payment parity, I get that, right? So am I going to earn as much money? Especially for those of us, and there's quite a lot of you on the call today who are in finance, you're not possibly not going to get as much if you look for an e-commerce role or something in education, for example. You know, there's a lot of ed tech out there that's really coming up and being part of the emerging technology market. You know, I'd love to do that, I really would, but would I have to take a massive pay cut? Maybe, I don't know. And is that something that would stop us? It might well do. So these are all things, valuable things that we need to consider when moving around from industry to industry. And I get all of those things that might prevent us. So we also, like I said, gave a chance for the recruiters. So there's a bit of corruption going on my slide here, apologies. And I don't know if you can read that. So we're saying 92% of the respondents for this survey that I did on LinkedIn said that they would absolutely challenge back to a client when they said that they wanted only people in candidates being put through that had industry experience or domain experience or understanding of that particular industry type. And they would be happy to challenge back, knowing and believing that this statement that the product discipline is industry agnostic, and they fully believed in that. So that's good to hear. Whether it, of course, is going to change the tide or change the experiences we have, I don't know. But it's certainly, I think, a bit of good news that we can hold on to and think that actually that's a whopping 92%. And that's really quite encouraging. Okay, so moving on a little bit in terms of what does that mean for us? I don't think that we should wait for the world around us to change. I don't think we should sit back and expect that things are going to change unless we do something about it. But what are the things that we can do in order to allow us to become, you know, industry hopping product people, as some of us would like to be even more than we are today? So there's a lot of words on the next slide, so I'll try and go through it as quickly as I can. I'm just aware of the time. So we can certainly influence the hiring. So we can make sure that when we're in role and when we're hiring people, or we're in a position to influence the hiring of people, that we are advocates of this statement that product as a discipline can definitely move from industry to industry, and don't just look to hire people that have done banking before or done e-commerce before, and look and expect that there's going to be more to add from people who are coming from a different industry. And certainly prove the point, if we get the opportunity to work, by illustrating best practice examples and being the people who showcase the fact that we can pick things up and hit the ground running within, you know, 60 days, 90 days. And actually that's something that I'm going to go through now in terms of what are the things that we should be doing in order to do that. So I'm hoping that these are all things that resonate with all of us. They're certainly things that I'd expect any good product person to already be doing, but it might be good to just remind ourselves of them. So obviously these are what I would call the sort of the key successes to being a good and effective product manager. So good, clear, consistent and regular communication. Focus on relationship building. Make sure that you are touching out to the people within your organization and outside, building those bridges and ensuring that you're generating great relationships. Increase your product knowledge, that's a given. Customer knowledge, absolutely a given. So all of this I can make available afterwards, or indeed quite a lot of this toolbox stuff is actually on the article that I mentioned earlier, so I can certainly send the link out to people if they're interested. Learn to love the analytics. That for me is a really key one. I think a lot of people expect that they're going to be fed the data and fed or allow data to be analysed by people other than themselves. For me, I think it's absolutely within our gift as product people to be making sure we know and love the data of our products and our product health as much as anybody else in a BA role. Business strategy, of course, you need to know how your product sits within the wider organisation, if it's not the entirety of it, if it's in a bigger company and it's not just about the product that you are responsible for. Know your competition, what's your competitive landscape, market landscape, and of course you need to know the tech stack. So I'm just zooming through all of this because there's a lot of stuff, but again, all of this can be read through after the talk if you need to. We've already talked a little bit about market landscape in terms of competition, but what lies ahead in your industry? What are the things that you need to be ready for? What's your strategy and how you're going to move and be agile and adapt as you need to? And of course, user experience. You need to be that CX, that UX evangelist, to make sure you work with your design and UX colleagues really closely to understand the experience that your customers are having using your product. So these are all things that are in our toolbox. These are all things we should be doing when we're in role. But I think there's a way that we can be ready for that in terms of having a 90-day plan when we're moving into a new role. And we do get given those opportunities. And I think this is always going to be used no matter what, but it's more prevalent and more important to think about these things ahead of time and ready yourself for this experience and this opportunity if you're moving into a new industry. So you need to learn the front end and back end. You need to know your architecture. Have what I call a boxes and arrows conversation with your the tech leads or the tech gurus in your organisation. You know, love those. I mean, I love a boxes and arrows session. I can have them, you know, for days on end if I need to. I need to understand how the product works technically in order to really be able to add value. You need to also be the customer expert. So I've had jobs in the past where I've gone in, I've spent 3 months and completely immersed myself in the customer, doing like ethnographic research, sitting with them day to day. How do they use that product? How does it allow them to do their job? And I can't tell you how valuable that information can be in order to make decisions on understanding what the job to be done for the product is for that person in that situation at the time that they're trying to use your product. You can't make assumptions about stuff like that. You need to get it from the horse's mouth. And then, of course, stakeholder relationships. Know who your stakeholders are and make sure that you're building relationships with them from the ground up and you know what is going to make them happy. So it's a lot of information. I know I've just whizzed through it because I was very conscious of time. That's the end of the slide deck.
Hi, Becky. Thank you very much for that. Very good, very insightful. Glad you engaged the sort of recruitment community as well.
Of course.
Always reach out to us here at Oliver Bernard if you do want to get some more insight or hear from any of us on the recruitment side of things. Thank you very much for that. Do you want to just unshare your screen?
Yep.
Perfect. John, have we got you audio okay? And do you want to just give your slides a quick share?
Yes. So that
Thank you very much. Let me just introduce you, John, if that's okay. So next up, John Fagan, a product and technical leader. His talk is Building Agile and AI Startups, Basic Tips for Product Managers. John, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, that talk was perfectly timed for me, Becky. I've been in the geospatial industry for 20 years in software engineering, product roles, and also finally like a CTO type product role. And Wednesday, I start a new product position in the biotech industry, biomedical, genomic research, so completely out of my comfort zone. I'm leaving this industry, which I thought I'd be in forever. I am taking a pay cut and everything, but really excited to see if I can apply my skills. I've got a 90-day plan now, so that's all good. Yeah, so appreciate that talk. So I'll just share my screen. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about AI and how to just tips on managing AI solutions within your products. It's kind of comes from experience I've had over the last 5 years being thrown in the deep end. I've always worked with data-driven products, but it has been a bit of a baptism of fire for me, working on products that require or use AI. And, you know, it started off 5 years ago when we raised a whole bunch of funding within a startup I was working, and we went and created a data science team. We actually hired 5 data scientists, all PhD people, very smart people. We created a sort of machine learning team in New York, and I'd really never worked with data scientists before, but, you know, our marketing, you know, said we have an AI product, so we had to build up AI capability, and these people were talking in a language I wasn't familiar with at all. And, you know, they really did blind me with science. And it was super intimidating for me, actually, even though a lot of these guys were quite young, fresh out of uni, or, well, you know, doing their PhDs. But, you know, it was quite difficult for me to be able to be in a position to really drive it from a product perspective and know we're working on all the right things for them. So I found it quite scary to do that. And I've had a lot of lessons learned, and that's kind of what I want to share with you. There isn't really any wizards there, you know. We always still joke that they were wizards, but there's there's a lot of different roles within the data science community, and you may need those at different times within the organization. And we, you know, I'd say we did make a mistake of hiring a lot of expert that maybe come more from the research scientist area early on in the business, but you should be familiar with the different types of roles within there. I won't go in too deep, but potentially, you know, in the early stages of a product or a startup, you'll probably be looking to ensure you hire a data engineer or business intelligence engineer in the early days. Then you really need to think about, is your data stack ready? I really like this hierarchy of needs for data science. And, you know, starting at the bottom of the pyramid, you really need to consider your capabilities from there. We actually jumped straight into the top of the pyramid when we started. We started building deep learning solutions pretty much immediately, but it was way too early to be able to do that. I mean, there are other reasons for that, but yeah, so I really recommend getting familiar with this and ensuring you have the capabilities in place before you can kind of move up the stack and start adding value on top of your data pyramid that you have. Someone took that hierarchy of needs and flipped it on its side. And, you know, you can see the different kind of specialisms in the company and the kind of roles which would evolve over time as you get to maybe the top of the pyramid, which is more research based. I've aligned that alongside product development lifecycle or startup lifecycle. And, you know, they do work quite closely together. And, you know, we, as I said, we hired people too early in our product development lifecycle. Actually, we hadn't even reached product market fit before we built up our AI team. So, you know, you can consider these two because it's an evolution, it's not revolution, unless you can kind of, unless you are an AI startup that are front loading it with some open source data or through a partner, you're never really going to have a mature data stack in place to really leverage it and start building AI-based solutions on top. This is kind of great, again, another pyramid. This is the last pyramid I'm going to share with you, but this really helps you, if you're familiar with Agile framework and working in sprints and find it hard, you know, we're always taught within product management and being a product owner of an Agile team that you've got to try and do thin slice stories that reach the end user. And that's really challenging to do if you're working in a data-driven product. So it's hard to be able to deliver deliver value in an incremental way because there's kind of building blocks. So it's almost a little bit waterfall-ish, I would say. So if you think about this, you know, this is a really good data value pyramid because you can demonstrate value at different levels as you evolve within your organization. So in the early days, I really recommend starting to prepare before the doctors arrive, and that's acquiring data science literacy. You know, there's lots of great resources out there. I mean, I would recommend getting your hands dirty and doing a Coursera course, you know, listening to podcasts. There's loads on YouTube right now, and getting familiar with the basic terms of machine learning, supervised, unsupervised, and all the different types of classification, etc., and understand the basic components and workflows. Then, you know, you can start incrementally or iteratively getting ready before, you know, the doctors arrive. You could, like I got one point down the bottom, one of my fellow ex-colleagues suggested that you should hire a data scientist early, maybe a data engineer, maybe on a short-term contract. But, you know, I like the idea. It can seem super overwhelming to be prepared to get your data stack ready. And if you just roll that into your retrospective and just make small and continuous improvements each week just to ensure that your data stack is getting mature, you know, taking care, you really need to, as a product manager, you need to take care of your data, know where it's going. I call it data hygiene and integrity, and, you know, put a bit of love in the data modeling area, you know, put some criteria into there, understand the data flows, and doing simple things like having some level of persistency in transaction IDs, you know, so if you have data flow in your system where there's a bunch of inputs and then there's some outputs and it's rule based, that you can, when that data is archived, there is a transaction ID that you're able to connect the two, which will really help for training and evaluating models down, or just seeing if machine learning can apply to make your rules-based systems more efficient. Yeah, and then put a simple data archiving mechanic in place, you know, whether that's throwing everything into S3, you know, some kind of object storage, but again, taking care of your hygiene of your data. So I say you gradually tune up your definition of done, you know, through the retrospective cycle to get ready. Also, an important thing, as I kind of mentioned before, you've got to prepare for a clash of cultures. And that's kind of the simple, you know, some of the challenges I've had, you know, onboarding people that maybe come from a more academic or research background. I'm very used to and experienced working on, I'm going to say, CRUD applications in an agile frameworks, working with software engineers, engineering culture, DevOps and testing. But it's a little bit different, and you've got to think about what, you know, how to deliver value and how data scientists think about delivering value. You can't, you know, create a 3-point story and just do the data science subtask. That's not really going to work. So following on, you know, obviously everything is about defining your problem, but really, you know, you've got to put way more love into defining your problem when you're working within a data-driven product. You've got to spend time collaborating with your engineers, your data scientists, you know, agreeing those assumptions and those expected outcomes. It's a lot more challenging than a classic problem, which I said before. I really recommend looking at Machine Learning Mastery. It's a great online website run by a guy in Australia. It's really tuned. The audience is developers, so enabling engineers, software engineers, to start moving into machine learning. However, there's quite a few good things in there for product managers, and I found this playbook he put together for defining your machine learning problem. So I highly recommend diving into that. I mean, I'll just share a few things in there which I really like, which has helped me kind of align with a data scientist where you don't really understand their language too well, and it enables you to speak sort of, you know, everyday language to kind of understand whether you're trying to build and solve the same thing. Because believe me, you know, that you will, because of the language differences, you will think you're working on completely different, you'll think you're working on the same thing, but when you've spent 2-3 months on it, you realize you completely kind of misinterpreted each other. I really, you know, so they you know, it's defining the problem. There's some good tips in there, but then down the bottom here, assumptions, you know, they propose a problem statement around predicting if someone's composing a tweet, predicting the likelihood of that tweet being retweeted, so that the user can edit the tweet to try and increase the likelihood of tweeting. So you can see some really basic assumptions in there from a machine learning model creation point of view. What are the factors that do you think are important, the assumptions that are important for building a predictive model for retweeting. So, you know, you can say specific words using the tweet will matter for the model. Specific user that retweets does not matter. The number of retweets may matter to the model. Older tweets are less predictive than recent tweets, etc. And then I love the testing the boundaries. It kind of retests the problem statements, so you can kind of use analogies of similar problems to this. And then down the bottom, I like that where you have to you ask the data scientist to break down the solution and how they would solve it if they were manually to do it. So those are really, you know, this particular playbook is quite good. And then I saw, you know, this example here of task experience. You can see above assumptions there, performance. And then I actually took that and just broke it down into a user story and applied BDD to it. You know, so in order to become a social media influencer as a regular Twitter user, I need Twitter to predict if my draft tweet content will get retweets. And then you can put the classic given, when and then statements in there, but you can then also put your assumptions into the and statement. I mean, that kind of works for me, but it does allow you to align with each other. So as a product manager, as Becky was saying, you know, getting down to the boxes, you kind of know what's important to the algorithm, which is really important as a product manager to be able to do that. So you can throw it into BDD style. So then you really need to care about success metrics, and you need to understand how data scientists talk about success metrics. So you need to understand the F1 score, you need to understand false positives, false negatives, and all the trade-offs. And the trade-offs is really important from a product manager point of view, because, you could, a data scientist come in maybe from a research background, may spend months and years trying to get the perfect F1 score, but from a product point of view, it may be good enough after 2 or 3 months, for you to do a release and start iterating on it. I like the impact mapping book. It's a small book. I recommend looking at that, because it does enable you, and I've used this a lot with data-driven products and machine learning at companies I work for, because you can put in the trade-offs, even costs, and where you may allow certain customer segment to kind of quality to drop a little bit because you're focused on a new customer segment in terms of accuracy of the outcomes. So then you're down into solving your predictive challenge. And this is where I've made a lot of mistakes in the past, because I've been, I can get caught up and get blinded with science, and I drink the Kool-Aid, etc. But I highly recommend you start with the dumbest solution first. That is really, you need to get your baseline. And then once you've got your baseline as a product manager, you can really know then when to kind of say, we've done it, we've got it to good enough quality now, because you may find that you don't need any machine learning solutions at all. A classic rules-based approach might be good enough to release. So in the example of the Twitter, you could just say, obviously the most dumbest model is 100% probability a tweet will be retweeted every time. You'd be surprised by some of these really dumb solutions, how well they perform. And normally with with rules-based solutions, you might get up to the 80, you might get up to the 90% accuracy. And you only need machine learning to kind of chase the nines, so to speak, up to the high nines. And so but it also enables you as a product manager to really understand the evolution of the solution. I highly recommend you understand model evaluation and the different types of it's done. Actually, you need to put a lot of love into your test data as well, because really test data is going deeper on your acceptance criteria. So you need to know what test data you're collecting training, for data you're collecting for not only training, but also validating your models. And I've always liked creating, the holdout report, because that's kind of, we've used like a static report of test data where where you're at. So you could have, all the previous tweets, they've been labeled if they got retweeted or not, and that's kind of a cross section of different users, and the success of the model on that. And then you might only change the holdout report every 3 months, but then at least you have a stable test data set that you can understand how the latest iterations of the model are performing. And you can also make those calls where you say, well, I can see it's not performing too well now for a particular segment of users, but I'm willing to take that because they're kind of a small percentage of our user base, and I'm willing to now, take a hit there, trade-off there to improve the performance of the model for these particular segment of users. So you also need a big topic in machine learning is bias, overfitting and underfitting. So you need to really understand that. So you really need to care about your test data. Again, it's like a deeper dive on your acceptance criteria. You need to, this is a hot topic in data science of bias, selection bias or exclusion bias. So you need to know a bit more about that. Going a little bit, this is, an area there, with going into bias, you need to know the technical, sides of it, how it impacts your product, but you're going a little, once you start getting to more deeper technical detail around that, how it's fixed with boosting and bagging, I wouldn't worry too much about that. You need to just be able to converse with the data scientists on that, you know, and then going down into, you know, I made a mistake, you know, really trying to understand all the different algorithms and everything. Just don't worry about that as a product manager. You know, those are just solutions. They're different algorithms that you use to create a model. You need to know the general flow and how an algorithm, you know, ingests training data and it produces a model and what a model represents. But, you know, that's what you hire data scientists to worry about that. So don't freak yourself out too much on the algorithm side of things. Where you should give your team time is worrying about infrastructure and deployment, you know, because you need to enable your team to invest in that. And I could go into more details on that, but we're running probably a bit out of time. So that's kind of, you're getting into the basics of setting yourself up with the ability to improve your product through machine learning. And then as you go, you know, for scaling from startups to scale up, you really need to build out your data science stacks. And, you know, data scientists, they work with different technologies. And you need to, I really recommend, you know, hiring DevOps person in data science. I think it's kind of a new role, but you really need to understand and evolve your software engineering stack into a data science stack. And it's not, once you're live with a model, it doesn't change, you know, but you need to keep iterating and updating it, not only if you're improving the quality, but over time your users will change. Along with your product life cycle, if you have your early adopters, then you enter growth, you'll acquire new users in new areas, new countries, new cities, new behaviors, and you have to constantly analyze that because your models will degrade over time. So you need to constantly monitor the performance and adapt them and refit them accordingly. Then a big topic, it goes back to the first topics in terms of preparing your data. Data warehousing is not always the best solution because there's a lot of friction attached to that because you have to have highly structured data. But you want to start investing in a data lake where you're throwing all your data in there. That enables your data on board, new data scientists to go in and have access to that data in a secure way, and everything's in there. You know, so that's kind of important too as your organization grows. And finally, most importantly, you really need to enable and promote collaboration between software engineers and data scientists, because traditionally, and that goes into your team structures as well. We've experimented with centralized approach, feature teams, and I do think it works much better when you know, like chapters and squads, Spotify, you have data scientists embedded in teams, but you have a chapter where they belong to, because it's really important to enable data scientists to collaborate with software engineers to enable the productionization and deployment of code. Yeah, that's super important. So that's about it. That's my deck and what I've learned over the last few years.
Thanks very much, John. Great talk. Really enjoyed that. So a couple of questions have come in, and they're both to both of you. We've had two questions come in, both to both of you. So what we'll do is, John, you've just spoke, so we'll go to Becky first. What do you look for when hiring for a product manager? Becky, you go first, and then straight over to you, John.
For me, I'd say variety is definitely the spice of life. So I think it depends on who I've already got in my team. So if I've got, a couple of, sort of in-depth analytical thinkers, people who are liking that data science that John's been talking about, then I'm going to be looking probably to hire in some more creatives and vice versa. In terms of product skill set, I think it's great if they've got product experience, but I've also, again, taken you to role people from recruitment, from technology, and all manner of different disciplines that people have come into product. So for me, it's product experience is always great in a sort of more junior role. You can take people in who have got no product experience, but ultimately they need to be a great communicator. They need to be someone who knows, or you can see off the bat that they can talk to anybody and generate good relationships and get stuff. They need a high level intelligence and emotional intelligence as well. You need to be the sort of master of all trades, really, I think, in the product world.
For me, it's the same, but I mean, it sounds dumb, but they have to be into product. I've had product managers that not really into it. You know, you've got to be. I mean, you can also have someone who's a software engineer. Like I, you know, when I was a junior software engineer, I realize now, you know, 20 years ago, I was into product. You know, I used to keep a list of all the competition. I just used to keep a text file of all the competition, and I used to have a look at what their capabilities are. I used to dive on and reverse engineer, you know, so you've got to have someone that's just kind of generally interested in products. So be able to talk about products that are available on the market and then, you know, how they differentiate themselves, what they don't like, do like. I see people that might want to transition into the product role, and I want to see evidence of them kind of being into that before. So you've got to kind of have that mindset, and it's not like a day job. It's something you think about, and you listen to podcasts, and you're generally interested in it. And then the other one is kind of being a bit of an agile ninja. You're always slicing and dicing. You always find a way to, you know, kind of please people. You can't be a yes man, but you've always got to find an angle, you know, to do it. So you've got to really respect the backlog. You know, that's your artifact. You know, engineers put so much love into their code. You've got to really put a love into your backlog. And if you're a product manager, product owner, and you're not editing your backlog multiple times a day, or even 100 times a day, in refactoring it based on latest feedback from engineering team, latest feedback from the market, you know, you may have expanded an epic into multiple stories because it's a priority, but now it's not a priority, then you collapse it back in. You just got to constantly iterate on it. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Another one has come in for you both. Becky, if it will go to you to answer first. How do you drive innovation?
Sorry, you cut up just as the question came out there, and I didn't hear what you said. I'm so sorry.
No problem. It was, how do you drive innovation?
I'm going to answer that as assuming it's a sort of ethereal you. So how does one as a product person drive as opposed to just me? So I think driving innovation is just part and parcel of the role. You've got to be looking to people who are interested in coming up with ideas. You've got to be fostering a culture of ideation and giving people time to come up with ideas. So, you know, John talked about the backlog. One thing that I've always been quite keen on is protecting, you know, like say 5 to 10% of the backlog for time to innovate and come up with ideas, in order to be able to have the time to consider things that just aren't part of the path or the current plan. So I think fostering the ability to do that through giving people and your team time to and space to think and come up with ideas is absolutely key. I think that's the main thing. Like, hopefully you've got the right toolkit and the right people in place in order to come up with ideas. If you give people time, you would hope you would. But I'd say that's always the first part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, with Becky, it's kind of the day job. We work in technology, you know. I guess maybe if you're working for a big corporate where things are quite slow moving, but they're not the case anymore, really. We're kind of doing innovation all the time. I think innovation is such a loaded word. You know, even little boring improvements you can make are innovation. You know, and sometimes, you know, it's just a case of recognizing, like I used to, in my backlog, I'd flag things up, just like as continuous improvement. So I just keep a track of them. So I say, no, the team, we've done you know, that's innovation, is continuous improvement. So I just track that as a KPI because people think they're just doing their day job. And then other than that, maybe it's a little bit getting out the building, going to events like this to, you know, inspire people, I run a big community meetup group as well, and every year we do a 54-hour startup event, and people get a lot out of that because they're thrown together for 2.5 days with people they don't know, and they go back to their day jobs, reprogram their head. So getting out of your building, so to speak, can help that fresh thinking. Listening to podcasts, it's kind of, I don't think you can, like 20% time. It just, I don't know whether it's can work. It might make good tick box, and it's an employee benefit, but yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you. Becky, how do you deal with the playoff situation? For example, you're down, you're one of two, the last two candidates in a process. The other has domain experience, but you don't. How do you suggest I could persuade the employer in that situation?
Well, that's happened to me at least once, I'd say. So I'm always the one that asks those probing questions. So I always make sure I foster great relationships with my recruiter, whether they be internal or agency, and ask those probing questions to find out as much as I can about the competition. So I have been in that situation before. And definitely it phases you, because straight away you feel like you're the underdog, you're on the back foot, what have you got to prove? But ultimately I see that as a gift as well, because if you are the underdog because you are the one that doesn't have the domain experience, then actually what have you got to lose? So I'm going to go in and try and wow them with my personality and my passion, and talk about how product is my lifeblood, is absolutely the thing that I care about more than anything else in my career, and talk about all the things that I've achieved. And hopefully my experience and the achievements I've had in my career will speak for themselves. I would say that it's a difficult one if you find that out. So it's a difficult situation to be in, because it will maybe make you feel less confident. But I would say you've got to have the confidence in your product specialism and what you've achieved as a product manager or leader in your career, and let that shine through and let that speak for itself. And if ultimately they're going to be looking for somebody with product experience, domain experience over and above, then there's not much you can do about it. But I think you can only ever do your best, and hopefully if you've got the product knowledge and know-how, that should see you through and get you the role. I hope that answers the question. It's a difficult one. It is hard.
I agree with that. And my advice would be to work with a good recruiter who has a good relationship with the client and can
help you.
sell you in and help you. Yeah, absolutely.
Good one, Alex.
I know a good recruitment agency, actually. John, how do you reach a point where you can comfortably judge effort/points for a data science heavy story?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's almost impossible sometimes. This is kind of why I say start with the dumbest solution first, because I made a lot of mistakes doing that. So you kind of have to, because there's an element of waterfall in it. I normally will do a couple of spikes with data scientists in a team, and get them to produce, it could be some one-off analysis and everything like that. So there's no points on it. It's a spike. It's time boxed. I actually the data scientist might work on it the whole sprint. And then when it comes out of that, you could put a proper story into the sprint, and it will be estimated as usual with the whole team, and thinking about not only all the factors within that. But yeah, it's not an easy one. But you would, particularly when you're starting it, but with a team that starts getting to know the workflows and how things work, and depends on the skill set. Like we've had previous data scientists, they would produce just a notebook, and which is like a prototype, and then it's just a case of, and a data scientist might produce that in a spike, and then it's more of a case of productizing that from an engineering perspective. So I'm not going to give you I wouldn't worry too much actually about in the early stage getting the points on it, because kind of will frustrate, you'll frustrate yourself.
Thank you, John. And that brings us to the end of the questions for this week. Massive thank you to Becky and John for your contributions and your great talks this week. Really great to hear from you both. Just to let everyone know, these sessions are recorded and it will be up on our YouTube channel by tomorrow morning. So if you want to share it or pass it on to other members of your team, then please feel free to do so. I've said it before, the recruitment market is really, really quiet at the moment, but here at Oliver Burnett, we are still working. We are all fully remote, working from home. So if you are looking for a new job, reach out to me. My name's Alex Scriven. I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, and we will do our very best to help. If you're currently hiring as well, I've got some great candidates looking who, I'd love to get in front of you. So do let me know on that one. If you're free tomorrow night, Agile London at 6 o'clock, got some good speakers on that one as well. But other than that, Product London is back next Tuesday. And thank you everyone for joining. This wouldn't happen without such a great product community as well. So thank you once again to John and Becky for your talks, and have a great evening, everyone.
Bye, thanks for hosting.
See ya. Bye-bye.